Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on sustainability and technology in civil construction. This webinar is going to cover off some of the survey results from the Construction Industry Survey 2021, which is a partnership between Civil Contractors New Zealand, the National Association for Civil Construction, and Teletrac Navman, who are a major associate of ours, and they're a significant technology provider for the civil construction industry. I'm Fraser May. I'm the Civil Contractors New Zealand Communications Manager, and I'll be facilitating today along with Bernard Hickey. Good morning, Bernard. Yeah, yep. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into it. In this webinar platform, there's a chat function. So you can see on the right hand of your screen, there is a couple of speech bubbles there. If you click those speech bubbles, you'll be able to ask us questions. That's also where I'll be dropping the links as they come. So if we're talking about a document, I'll try and provide you a link to that document throughout the webinar, just so that you're up with the play and you've got that on hand. So thanks to those who have joined us already. We'll just wait a minute or so for any others to arrive in the webinar room. And in the meantime, I will take the chance to introduce our presenters today. So we've got Jim French from Teletrac Navman. He's the construction industry specialist, and he's beaming into us from Sydney. Morning, Jim.
Morning, Fraser. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. How's the weather in Sydney?
Beautiful day. Thanks.
Yeah. Great. Okay, we've got Bernard Hickey, who is a pretty renowned journalist, if you don't mind me saying so, Bernard. And it's our privilege to have you today. So, how are you going? You're Wellington-based these days, are you?
Yes, level Delta 2. So inside, and I wish I was somewhere level 1, but it's level Delta 2.
We've got Stacy Goldsworthy, who's a technical manager for Civil Contractors New Zealand, who is based coming to you from West Auckland. How are you going, Stacy?
Very well. Yep. Morning, everybody. Thanks for turning up this morning to listen to this presentation.
Great. We've got Adrienne Miller, who is the General Manager in New Zealand for the Infrastructure Sustainability Council. How are you going, Adrienne?
Good, thank you.
Great. And thanks for joining us, Carla Bates, Head of Environment for KiwiRail. How are you?
Kia ora. Good morning.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I think we're probably safe to go on with the webinar, and I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction to start off with around the Construction Industry Survey. So this is a year-on-year project that we've got going to really gauge industry perspective for the civil construction industry. So it's a partnership that Civil Contractors New Zealand has with Teletrac Navman, and we've got year-on-year data going back to 2017 when we first conducted the survey. We cover off a lot of things in the survey. There's workforce, there's procurement, there's all sorts of things in there. If you're interested in past surveys or the full results of the current survey, that is available at the CCNZ website, and I have dropped a link to that survey so the previous surveys on our publications page in the chat function there. In this webinar, we're going to be covering off the sustainability and technology sections of this year's construction industry survey. So we're giving them some specific focus. We discussed the general results at conference and as part of a panel discussion featuring sort of senior industry leaders, but we thought it was just quite timely to give a bit more focus to sustainability and technology based on some of the developments, for instance, COVID-19 having on the industry, and also some of the procurement initiatives for government actually starting to hit the market. So first off, and I might just ask the presenters to turn off their webcams at this point, otherwise we'll have heads over the top of text. So thanks for that, everyone. And we'll get you to come back on when it's your turn. So I guess one thing in the testing for this webinar, I asked the question so what is sustainability? And, part of the answer was, well, there are a lot of different ways you can answer that question. And there are a lot of different ways that people are trying to answer that question. So it's good that we're all talking about the same thing. Really, the common ground we had is that New Zealand signed up to the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, along with all UN member nations. So there's a bit of stuff in there. It ranges from poverty through to looking after wildlife, through to sustainable workforce, to sanitation and clean drinking water. So there's a lot in there when we're talking about sustainability. I think the discussion at the moment is largely around the 13th point on there. If you can't read it, it's the climate action, but that is one of the points of what sustainability is considered to be. Now, New Zealand has signed up to this. The Office of the Auditor General actually just quite a timely way, they produced a report on how New Zealand is performing against those objectives. So I'll drop a link to that in the chat function now. Suffice to say that there's a way to go. So I'll leave you to have a look at that yourselves. How's this influencing the work on the ground? So, New Zealand signed up as a country to some pretty high level goals there. How does that influence what we're doing? In terms of procurement, there's a lot of different clients that are looking at this and the reason, looking at this in different ways. An early adopter and actually it came in procurement. So there was a procurement reset in 2019 after EBIT construction fell over. So they looked at changing the procurement rules, and from there you hear this term come up, sustainable procurement. So government contracts have changed to consider broader outcomes than just cost, and we see that as a pretty good thing. I mean, if you can fund training and workforce, if it means that the government's actually looking to employ people in civil construction and looking at that as an outcome, as opposed to just delivering the asset for the lowest cost possible, that's one way to go. So there's a link to the procurement rules to drop that, and I won't spend too long on that though. So in this webinar, we're looking at also technology in construction. So, productivity, major issue for the industry. In terms of where we're looking at post-COVID, there's a wodge of text there. I want you to read it all, but there's a lot of technological change coming on at the moment, and I think a lot of companies are looking at technology to reduce to improve efficiency and also to measure what they're doing in their businesses. So, technology is pretty major change going on. So I thought that was a really good starting point. We'll look at technology. If you've got any questions going through this webinar, I'm going to hand over to Bernard now to talk us through his initial reactions to some of the technology findings from the construction industry survey this year, and he'll be bouncing back and forth with some of the other presenters, I think, to really get on any detail that he's looking for. So please take it away, Bernard.
Thank you very much, Fraser. It's great to be here and look in depth at this study, which has become a touchstone, really, for those people watching the infrastructure sector and the relations between the government and the sector, in a way, to see what the other side of the coin is. I spent a lot of time talking to ministers and reading government reports and asking them questions. And just this Monday, we heard from Minister Michael Wood and the NZTA Waka Kotahi long-term plan about what their side of the coin is saying about what they think should happen and what they'd like to happen. But this is a great survey to give us a sense of what's actually happening on the ground and what the people actually doing the stuff are saying. This part of the survey I found fascinating because it reflects what I'm seeing in other parts of the economy post-COVID. This is essentially a turbocharging of the shift towards higher use of digital technology in work. So obviously the lockdowns forced a lot of people to go home and to suddenly work out how to use Zoom and all sorts of things. And certainly the same thing has happened in all sorts of sectors, partly because of necessity. We just weren't allowed to be close to each other, but also because it's now clear in the wake of COVID that there is a real problem with staff shortages and a need to improve productivity, not just productivity in terms of output per hour, but in terms of safe output per hour, and to do it in a way which the procurer sees as not just good value in the short term, but good value in the long term. And doing that work in a way which generates the data that it helps improve productivity and accountability, both internally and from a procurer's point of view. So this survey, as you can see there, shows that there's now 80% or so of the survey respondents who are using phones and tablets to check in, which makes an awful lot of sense now that New Zealand has more than one smartphone per person. And now everyone's pretty familiar with how to use their apps. Not as familiar, I'm sure, as the Ministry of Health would like in terms of use of the check-in apps for COVID. But increasingly, we are using these systems and we are familiar with them, particularly with younger workers who really get this world. Fleet tracking, of course, increasingly important, and not just in terms of having an efficient fleet, but also knowing exactly where people are and where they've been. So in this COVID world, we can understand who they've been in contact with and be able to control that. Increasingly, that's a question we hear from within government. How do we know where you are that you are there at a certain time and that you're in contact with the people that we know you're in contact with? Because later on, we're probably going to have to recreate that. And it's been interesting to see the whole process of tracking and tracing through these various outbreaks. That's not going away. Interesting to hear yesterday, Chris Hipkins, the COVID-19 minister, talk about COVID as a 9/11 moment when our use of technology, our practices around our health and our movements are going to change in a way that movement on airliners and through airports changed completely after 9/11. So this is a big moment for all of the economy, and in particular for this economy, to essentially leap forward into a tech-heavy, data-heavy, and accountability-heavy world. Cameras on site, obviously that's a big deal, not just to understand where people are going and be able to understand after the event what's gone on, but also increasingly as we move to a 5G world, facial recognition and also the ability, for example, the latest iPhone to use LiDAR to map where people are going and start to use automation and technology in a more aggressive way. And the same thing is we're seeing in terms of asset tracking. It was interesting. The Prime Minister said yesterday that she was using Flight Tracker to watch a batch of 250 doses go all the way from Spain to New Zealand this morning because we need those doses. So really interesting to see that that change in the use of technology, and just to know that it's not just your industry. Everyone has had this great leap forward in terms of use of technology. So you might want to zip forward to the next one. Great, and you can see there where people are familiar with types of technology and where there is room for growth. So digital twin technology, I just wanted to focus on briefly, which is where you're seeing, for example, with KiwiRail and with NZTA, increasing use of these essentially virtual maps of exact sites so that people can have that tool to avoid disaster and also be more efficient, which is great. And you can see there that there's an increasing use of an awareness of this technology as we go through. The blockchain at the end there, not quite such a big thing, but I think as we move towards a tracked and traced world where technology systems can talk to each other, and we have ways of identifying exactly what something is, where it is, and being confident about the truthful, that blockchain will become more of a thing. Although I'm certainly not I don't think that it turns into any sort of cryptocurrency world that we all have to use and love. So just moving on there, Fraser. Yep. There's room for a lot more people to use a lot of this technology, and there is going to be a need for it in this worker shortage world, and a need to track and trace everything all the time. And not just that, to be able to integrate with some of the machine learning and automated technologies which are coming through, particularly as we move to a 5G world, now that both Vodafone and Spark are setting up their systems, and the manufacturers and distributors of kit and gear are starting to integrate these. And of course, the grand hope is that people will be able to do a lot more work remotely and safely, and also in all weathers, and be able to do a lot more with a lot less, because worker shortages are here to stay. It's not just a COVID thing. It's not just people choosing not to work or not being there. Literally, there is all across the developed world, massive shortages, and also the inability to solve those shortages by simply importing workers. If there's one message I'd like to throw in there today, that it's that we're not going to be able to bring in migrant workers for the next 2 or 3 years at all, because the borders stay closed at least until well into next year, if not 2023, because of the problems with COVID and our inability to expand MIQ in a safe way, or to drop our elimination strategy in any fast way. So get ready to try to solve your problems locally and with technology, rather than with lots of extra migrant workers. Moving forward there, Fraser. Yeah, so obviously you're going to need that technology to be able to bid for work, as particularly when it comes to tracking your performance on a sustainability basis, being able to understand what all your workers are doing, and being able to guarantee not just to workers but also to procurers that you have a safe environment, that it's an efficient environment, and that it has some accountability attached to it. And interesting to see, of course, fleet tracking is the main one there, but you're certainly going to see a lot more use of big data in the way that we all work, and also in the issue of asset tracking. So I'd like to talk to Jim French now. We'll bring in Jim French to the conversation to talk about how some of this technology can be used. Over to you, Jim.
Thanks, Bernard. Good morning. I guess post-pandemic, most of the world has discussed and talked about building its way out of recession. And we can see, in New Zealand and Australia, large infrastructure budgets, the US, $1.3 trillion for the American jobs. So when we look at these projects and the impact that they have, how do we get bang for buck? How do we best manage them? And this project called WestConnex, if you go to the next slide, please, Fraser. WestConnex is, the largest road project in Australia. And, the idea is to, build roads that go from the north towards the south, east to west, and link them so that, Sydney keeps moving largely. The Roselle interchange, which is this project, is in a very small site. It's only actually 0.2 hectares, and it links all these roads. So it's an interchange that's being built, and it's at the junction of two main arterial roads into the centre of Sydney. And, City West Link out to the western suburbs, and Victoria Road, from the northwest, and they both link onto Anzac Bridge. So it's quite a pinch point. And, when we were approached by the company, the joint venture that's looking after this project, to come up with a plan for traffic management. And the traffic management was, obviously not to create large traffic jams on the main arterials, but also to keep truck and dogs and PBS out of the local government areas. They didn't want large trucks running up and down small streets. And equally, beside the job site, there's also a cruise liner berth. Now, as it happens, that wasn't an issue because we've had a pandemic and there is no cruise liners coming into Sydney, so that side of it didn't present an issue. If you go to the next slide, please. So the job site, what they had asked for was, how can we improve a couple of things? Safety, that's primary on all job sites, and as part of procurement, you have to demonstrate sustainability. Largely in construction, I guess we think of sustainability, firstly as the environment. But what the contractors would ask for was, We want to reduce noise pollution. We don't want lots of people ringing in complaining about trucks running up and down, small streets. That was the number one thing. And traditionally, local government, they're the first ones to object to any large development. Everybody wants the road, but nobody really wants it to be built. So managing the traffic, we had to be able to demonstrate that a system would meet the requirements of RMS, who are the Road and Maritime Services, and also the Ports Department. So there's a couple of different people involved in this. But at the end of the day, we're trying to demonstrate that technology will help industry and it will provide data that's useful and meaningful, and we provide it in a real-time format. So initially, we have 400 to 500 truck movements. That's just truck and dog on this small site. By introducing this system and automating, the allocation, so as a truck arrives towards the job site, the driver gets an automatic spoken message to tell him which gate to go in, where he has to go. So there are 3 tunnels on this particular job site, tunnel A, B, and C, and the system manages everything based on productivity. So what the spoils engineers said as their targets is how the system manages the trucks. And what you found, one of the immediate benefits for the subcontractors were the system balances allocations. So everybody gets a fair share of the allocations. And at the end of the day, we can see that each contractor gets the same amount of actual allocations and trips. So there's no competition on the road to try and get back to just increase, your potential for an extra load. So it's fairly balanced. There's digital records of all vehicles, and in terms of environmental, this is important because there are regulations around the dumping of contaminated waste. So we need to be able to prove that a truck has gone to the correct disposal site. And the real-time data and tracking shows where the trucks have gone. We get weighbridge data, we get photographs of the weighbridge dockets. So we have objective evidence for the joint venture, so that they know where everything's gone. And if they're asked, or if there is an audit, they can provide this data to show it. The fact that it's digital means that subcontractors get paid quicker because everything is submitted instantaneously. So your delivery docket is a digital docket that's submitted immediately. So we have records of all the load types and the actual weights, all tip and side entrance, as well as guidance for the drivers. If there is a breach, if somebody goes down a road that they shouldn't go down, there's an automatic alert so that site becomes aware of it. So in terms of safety and productivity increased by a substantial amount, to the extent that, initially before we started to roll out the system, spoils engineers, as many of you will be familiar with, will have a radio in one hand, telephone in another hand, and if they had a third hand, that would have a radio in it as well, as they try to manage and maintain trucks in and around the spoil areas. The system got rid of that, which allows spoil engineers to concentrate on what they want to do around productivity and managing material types. And that was the big benefit, is the ability to see the whole job site, see all the truck and dogs, as they approach from different locations. We use the analogy, it's like air traffic control, except you replace aircraft and with, trucks and yellow iron and light vehicles to give a full picture of what's going on the job site. So this was rolled out, about a year ago. We spent a lot of time tweaking it and, sort of addressing different concerns from the contractors themselves. And a lot of it is largely is driven by local government requirements and state government requirements. Next one, please. So what we found: benefits, manage the supply chain risk, automate site safety, communications. We've been in lockdown in Sydney for, I think it's 12 weeks now, and a lot of the job sites were closed. But once they opened up, there were a lot of restrictions on them. So a simple example of that is, as a truck approaches the job site, they'll get a message to say, you must remain in your truck, you must wear a mask while in the truck, and all windows must be closed. And that's a spoken message just to remind the drivers of what's going on site. If there are any problems on site, these messages get pushed out by the engineers as well. So there's complete communication without the need to ring a whole bunch of different people. Everything can be automated very quickly. Obviously, visibility for operations, everybody can see what's going on, and there's different levels of vision. and we've reduced costs because we know that the recyclable materials are going to be recycled. They go to jobs in Western Sydney and they go to jobs in the south of Sydney. And obviously contaminated waste, we can now demonstrate that it has gone to suitable waste facilities. It's not being dumped in places that are not approved for, contaminated waste. And, if there's asbestos, it's going to asbestos approved sites. So in terms of the whole project, the introduction of the technology has had a huge impact to the extent that, they're very dependent on it. If it goes down for any reason, it's, in the unlikely event that it goes down, it actually has never gone down. They say that, it will cause chaos for them. They've become that reliant on it, which is good. The system is very robust. And out of all the data, out of all the information, there's a huge amount of data from where you can extract complete cycle times, which gives you the cost to move a cubic meter, a meter, 100 meters, a kilometer. So a lot of benefits in terms of large data, and all this data can be used on future tenders. Just go to the last slide, please, Fraser. Essentially, we finish up with a digital construction site with the ability to, connect, monitor, analyze, and predict and optimize in real time. All the information in one location from all carriers, regardless, of whether, they've got their own telematics or using our telematics. It's an open system so that we can produce a lot of data from a lot of sources to make the job more flexible, more easy, and better to understand the cost and management of the job. That's pretty much it. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Jim. I think that's a really good illustration of like a connected construction site. I mean, getting all that information live and in real time, obviously some real advantages to that. Just another brief example of technology in a construction site was came up at our conference. This is a digital engineering example. So this is that digital twin technology that we mentioned before. They scanned the rail line for the project the electrification of the rail line up to Upper Hutt. And from that, they were able to create a digital shield. So this is a KiwiRail project to prevent the booms of the excavators entering the rail corridor, which meant the project could keep working while the train system was still running, and all sorts of benefits in terms of safety and efficiency there. So moving on to the sustainability side of things, I think it's a really good illustrations of like how collecting data in real time can provide some advantages to businesses. I'll hand back to Bernard now to start us off on the sustainability topic. Please take it away, Bernard.
Thank you very much, Fraser. Sustainability is a buzzword and is increasingly being integrated into actual procurement decisions and the ways that not just ministers but the likes of Treasury and others are looking at the world as well. And you can see here from the survey that's being done that now 37% are saying that they won the contract based on a broader outcome and not just on carbon emissions. We're talking here about employment, about diversity, living wage, and also keeping a lot of that money circulating in the local economy, which is important. I wanted to ask the other members of the panel what they are seeing on the ground at the moment, post-COVID in particular, on the sustainability side. So if we could bring back our panelists, there we go. Thank you very much. Who wants to jump in? Adrienne?
So I'll go. My take is we're going to see increasingly more emphasis on sustainability. I mean, Jim's already touched on this. Given the magnitude of investment that's been made post-COVID in our sector, I think there's going to be an increasing call for that investment to do more, and that's sustainability in the broader sense of that word, more than environment, the overarching sort of viability, tenability, social license issues, as well as environmental considerations.
And Carla, what are you seeing there?
Yeah, I definitely second what Adrienne's saying. I mean, I think the slide that we've settled on in terms of the surveys, probably the key metrics here around that broader outcomes that have, that contracts have been won under. If we think back to that slide right at the start of the presentation where we kind of went through what those UN Sustainable Development Goals look like and trying to encapsulate what is sustainability, I mean, it's a really broad area, and it's really exciting to see that those wins in the contract space are considering these much broader considerations around sustainability, because this is absolutely the direction that we will be heading in, and that will be broader, that list.
Yes, particularly like the government are looking at issues like carbon credit liabilities in future, and if they're doing their job properly, working out the long-term cost of not employing a diverse workforce in its balance sheets that the report. Good opportunity, therefore, to bring you in to talk about how KiwiRail is looking at sustainability in its employment and in its construction contracts.
Yeah, I think we'll get there. I think it's maybe we'll go on to Adrienne first, because sorry, Bernard, it's yeah. So we're probably time for Adrienne to present. Yeah, we'll go on to those slides. So if I can get everyone to turn their webcams off, apparently it's causing a bit. I think it's causing a bit of disruption. I'm having some trouble hearing there. So, but I think time for you to take it away, Adrienne.
Sure. So what I've been asked today to talk about by Bernard is and by Fraser is what we're calling the paradigm shift, and that's the shift from asset to impact. Obviously, we've got much heralded changes, and we've already talked about those in the physical world and needing to consider asset resilience, climate change, etc. But we're also seeing vast changes in terms of human expectations. So what I'd like to talk about, if I could have the next slide, please, Fraser, is obviously we're all really familiar on this call with the old way of contracting, which was all about time, cost, quality, pushing those two bars as far apart as possible so that we've got differentiation between our costs and our price. But that's all changed. So if I could switch to the next slide, Fraser. We've now got an additional triangle added, and rather than the project team delivering the asset, we've got the asset delivering impacts for community and for the procurer. So we've got time has changed. So rather than it just being about time, it's actually about time being not a multiplier for costs, but impacts, and it's the entire life cycle of the asset, and we had that mentioned right at the outset. Cost also changes to economic, so it's less about the cost of delivery and more about the payback, the return on investment that we get from the investment in the asset. And rather than the client wanting there to be less of it, they want more of it because the outcome is something that they're after. Also, quality stops being about the thing, the asset, and instead becomes about the experience of it and the impact that that project and asset can have on the community, not only physically, but also culturally, environmentally, and socially. And we've also got a couple of extra points here on the additional triangle to be able to deliver on social license and shareholder concerns. We've got also environmental, which we mentioned earlier. We've got governance, and we've got social, which includes also cultural factors. So the governance holds it all together, and the two triangles together make a star. And organisations in the sector have got a choice between choosing to adjust just to this new paradigm, or where they do not, and I don't like to put too fine a point on this, they do really run the risk of being left behind because others will seize the opportunity that sustainability represents. So if I could have the next slide, please, Fraser. And here I just wanted to say, don't be thinking this is stuff you don't already know. This comes down to really inputs and outputs, and I won't read all the text under there, but also when you're delivering the asset, how you do it, where you do it, and who you do it with. It's about collaboration and partnerships, and how things impact those in the communities where you're delivering the asset. So I'd also like to remind everybody, because it seems like this is a big journey that we're on here with sustainability, that we've been on something similar recently, and that's in the space of safety. So if I could go to the next slide, I think there's, thanks Fraser. I think there are many parallels with health and safety, and it's worth revisiting that because the sector's learned a lot and we've come a really long way. Health and safety was initially seen as a business risk to be managed by a specialist advisor and as an adjunct to BAU. And the approach was one of systems and processes, measurement and compliance imposed from the top down. And we had sort of punishment for those that didn't adhere to the rules. And gradually over time, though, we started to attribute incidences to personal choices or Swiss cheese factual alignments. And then we gradually realised that this was really about organisational culture that was driving behaviour. We also started looking a little bit more closely under safety too with the incident-free instances and where things went right. Instead of looking in the rear vision mirror, we started to understand that safety was less about compliance and much more about culturally embedded values. Organisations moved to overarching golden rules. And I feel like a lot of that same change is happening with sustainability. We're also starting to realise that it isn't just the job of one person to drive safety or sustainability. It actually becomes a broader competency that all leaders in an organisation have to exhibit. And I think for this to really get traction, that is the way your organisation should be approaching this. I think sustainability in too many minds is still linked, and we touched on this at the start, with environmental, when it's actually much, much more than that. As I said earlier, it's about overarching viability, tenability, and it needs to permeate all aspects of an organisation's decision-making and its supply chain. So that's probably it from me. I think draw the parallels from safety, where we've been on that, and learn from that and make it something that everybody helps carry the load on, and that's where we'll get to the good outcomes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks, Adrienne. And I think we skipped a pretty vital part there, which was about what the Infrastructure Sustainability Council is and where you fit in the picture. So basically, in terms of how we measure sustainability, the frameworks we use to bring it into business, the Infrastructure Sustainability Council provides that. And
Yes.
Waka Kotahi, New Zealand Transport Agency, and KiwiRail are both using the Infrastructure Sustainability Council framework to recognise how they can bring sustainability into their projects. Is that a good description? Please feel free to build on that just briefly.
No, that's great. Thank you, Fraser. Okay. Yes, that's exactly right. So Waka Kotahi in September last year mandated the use of the IS rating tool, and we're also in the process of developing another tool called IS Essentials that will be rolled out in the market. It's currently being piloted, including by Waka Kotahi itself, and we see real prospects for that, particularly as we undergo reform in the Three Water space and the regional nature of some of our infrastructural investments, which are quite dispersed. So watch this space. There's more stuff coming. Anybody want to look me up on LinkedIn, feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to come and tell your organisation a little bit more about what we've got on offer.
Thank you. Now, going on to the client perspective, Carla, if you could join us via webcam, that'd be great. Thanks very much for joining us, by the way. I think, really looking forward to your perspective, and please take it away. You've got the floor.
Kia ora koutou. Ko Carla Bates, aho, he KiwiRail Head of Environment. Thank you, Fraser. Yeah, it's an honour to be here and be able to present from a I guess like a client infrastructure perspective. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about sustainability and procurement, and also some of the technological aspects, I guess, that we're currently sort of seeing or looking to progress in KiwiRail around management and measurement of performance and outcomes in the sustainability space as well. So just, I guess, by a little way of introduction, my background is in contaminated land and also construction, environmental and social compliance before I came to KiwiRail. And my team, I have a small team, and we kind of basically work across our operations and maintenance, capital projects and property teams in terms of helping them enable environmentally sustainable outcomes through their work processes. So if we move on to the next slide, Fraser.
Coming up.
So in terms of procurement, I've really kind of just tried to demonstrate it in two kind of strands from the way that I see it within KiwiRail and the way that we work with our sustainability team within KiwiRail as well. So I like to point out that, you know, that sort of compliance and regulatory aspect of environmental and social outcomes, you know, and I think Adrienne sort of touched on it before, like this stuff isn't new. And I guess that, you know, just to try and, you know, bring some comfort into it, we're not starting from ground zero with sustainability, and certainly that's not happening in the contract industry at all either. We've got all of this work that's been done, and I know Stacey's going to talk about some of the environmental guide and things a bit later as well. We've got work that's been done, you know, over the last sort of 30 years in executing the Resource Management Act around environmental and social sustainability, and basically those regulations are around you know, sustainable use of resources. That was the intent of those regulations. So the work that's been done in that space, and certainly that is a big part that KiwiRail sees as part of the overall sustainability when we're looking at procurement, is how are we going to how are we placed to meet those outcomes, because they are the basis and foundation of those sustainability outcomes. And then I guess the other component of procurement as well is around that broader sustainability outcomes. And like I said, we work with our sustainability team on that as well, because my team's kind of looking mainly at the environmental componentry of the sustainability outcomes. What we've started to do is create objectives basically within KiwiRail, where we're reviewing those UN Sustainable Development Goals that we talked about at the start of the presentation, and really just trying to focus on what are we trying to achieve, and then starting to drive those down into maybe more goods and service focused objectives. So there's I guess more of a partnership with our contractors around, well, how are we going to enable those, or what does delivery or execution of those objectives look like? And then that will flow down into looking at KPIs and setting reporting and data requirements around sustainability in that procurement process as well. And just around that wider support around you know, what does that look like when we're doing procurement as well? I'm just trying to sort of show that there's lots of different external stakeholders, and there's lots of external requirements on us as well as a client. We have clients as well. We have stakeholders. You know, we have government money. We're a state-owned enterprise, so we have to not only look at what are our business strategic objectives, but also what do we need to report on as well? What are our requirements in reporting? So as we start to tease those out and those start to evolve, we will have to evolve what we're asking data and reporting on to come through as well.
Great.
So
yeah, we're running a bit behind time, so I'm sorry to hurry you up. It's a bit unfair.
That's right. Okay, no worries. So this is just a slide showing the objectives that I was talking about, basically. If you want to just move to the next slide.
Oh, that's a good slide, though. So I think, yeah,
Okay.
thanks for putting that together. And this presentation will be recording will be made available. We'll make the slides available as well.
Oh, perfect. All right.
Great. So yeah, please continue on.
Yeah, so this last slide is really just around digital technology and where it's kind of, interfacing with those sustainability outcomes. So, you know, like I said, I'm looking at things mainly from an environmental sustainability perspective. It's really around that spatial mapping and spatial data collection that I see, you know, is going to be the thing that's going to be really integral in measuring and gathering and looking at how are we performing and how are we executing those environmental outcomes and sustainability.
Oh, it looks like we might have lost Carla there as well. Unfortunate. I'm sure she'll rejoin us in a moment. Here we go. Yeah, Carla's back. Sorry, Carla, we lost you there for a brief moment. Okay, so I think we might have to move on to Stacy now. Stacy, if you could shoot through this really, really quickly. This is some of the contract because I think, you know, we've said we'll go for an hour. We'll try and stick to that. I think we might go for a little bit longer based on where we're at now, because it's good to leave some time for discussion. But please take it away, Stacy.
Very good. Morning, everybody. Yeah, I suppose just to echo the words of Carla and Adrienne, we've got a government at the moment that's a lot more focused to bringing in regulation and legislation that's going to enable sustainability. So we are on a journey, and that whole journey is going to affect the whole supply chain. So I suppose Civil Contractors New Zealand looking at setting up different work groups and effectively a sustainability working group to start to work out or interpret, as we probably do with the COVID times at the moment, what the government message of the day is, and then try and put that into action for our members. So I suppose just some of the initiatives that some of our members have engaged in. I'll just start there. So Fulton Hogan set up a company, or they purchased a company called Green Fuels, and that's taking oil waste from businesses within Christchurch, running that through a factory, and then producing a biofuel for themselves and sort of for clients. So it's reusing what would traditionally be waste. Z Energy, they import at the moment a biodiesel, so they just more so on a project by project basis. If it does stack up, they look to provide that as an alternative to just using diesel. They do have availability at their Highbrook truck stop down there to provide this product. At Downer, a few years ago, it's a business that I was intimately involved in. They set up Green Vision Recycling, primarily looking at concrete recycling, and Green Vision and Downer have looked at work with Auckland Transport at setting up a localised recycled concrete specification. So to take some of that, I suppose, risk away from consultants, contractors, and them. They did a lot of work and engagement with the wider recycling industry in Auckland to nail down that specification. And I suppose it is in addition to the Wakatahi New Zealand Transport Agency M4 specification as well. You're hurrying me up, are you, Fraser? To go on to the environmental guide. So the guide was set up during the skirt days following the earthquake, and it was very focused around Canterbury and Christchurch in particular around that rebuild. So there was a request from some of our membership to have a more national guide, and fortunately we had Carla from KiwiRail and David Gregg from Wakatahi involved in its development or its broadening of its context, and they provided that client input. So we developed it as a. Actually, Fraser, onto the next slide. So we developed it in the same sort of context as what the Canterbury branch had. We added a lot more around stakeholder engagement with on national projects, you know, and with archaeological sites, heritage sites. I suppose when Canterbury after the earthquake, there was probably less of them. There was a real engagement piece that we wanted to make sure that the guides enacted, so that those that are looking at going onto sites can have some methodologies of engagement. So we broke it down into a 3-step process. So first up, looking at site planning, you know, going to site, seeing what's there, seeing what you do have. Then how do you plan? But you know, if there is risks, doing risk assessment and looking at what appropriate controls that you would have. Site preparation. So this is getting on site and making sure that any controls that you've identified through that risk assessment process are put in place. And as we always know, when you go onto site, you know, got the best laid plans, there's always subject to some change. So if there are additional controls that you do require, then implementing them. And then finally, look, the site works. That's the DOE part, and making sure that you have all those controls. They're all functioning as you intended, and as some of the activities on the site change, that you're making sure that you're assessing that risk and controlling any adverse effects. So that's a quick shot. Fraser, back to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much for that, Stacey. Sorry to hurry things along. We've asked for an hour of people's time, and we'll try not to go too far over. I guess is the key there. Yeah, so sorry to hurry everything up, and I'm sure everyone's got a whole bundle of questions. But since we've got Bernard here to give us some insight, I think it's good for you to lead some discussion based on what you've seen now. Bernard, please go ahead and lead some discussion. And we have got some questions in the chat function. If you want to ask any of those, that's fine. I will drop some answers given by Adrienne to the Sustainability Council stuff. But please take it away, Bernard.
Yeah, one of the things that has come out today and came out in the results of the survey is that the use of technology and the focus on sustainability is increasingly important because of shortages of staff, shortages of material. And it's interesting, from some of the questions in the chat, there's discussions about shortages, obviously, of staff, but also the need to recycle, to deal with the building material and aggregate and other shortages of things that are cropping up. So it becomes increasingly important to focus on that productivity and efficiency, using both technology and also thinking longer term about the sustainability issue in terms of recycling of and being more efficient with materials and with time, and of course safety, because every day that's lost for a safety issue is effectively a productivity loss. Just looking in the chat section for more questions out of today's survey. Is there anything you'd like to know that we can help with here from the survey results? Just having a look through the questions. Just looking at...
Well, the first one was around sustainability, the link between sustainability and quality. I think that's an interesting point. Someone want to tackle that?
Yeah, so obviously for those people who are looking at the procuring side of things and wondering what is it that works for contracts, it's clear that the government and increasingly the procurers are starting to look at the longer term impacts of how a project is developed, and not just from the point of view of how much it costs to build and when is it delivered, but what are the long-term ongoing life asset costs. And if you're able to show that you have tracked the resources going into the project and can identify how much time was spent and you're being efficient in how you produce it, that suggests, of course, that the asset itself is being more efficient over the longer run. And certainly as the government looks to invest more in infrastructure, and we heard from the National Land Transport Plan on Monday that it's going to be up 40% in the next 3 years to 23.4 billion. An awful lot of money being pumped into infrastructure. And as we've seen in the questions, intense pressure on materials supply, shortage of materials, and particularly with the lockdowns we've seen just in the last couple of days, that the building materials manufacturers in Auckland have managed to get an exemption to the level 4 rules, although at the moment they're only allowed 100 staff in particular sites, which is restricting supply. And I think it's worth knowing for everyone over the next 3 to 6 months that these lockdowns, which a lot of people would like to finish very quickly, are unlikely to finish quickly. And there is going to be continued pressure on not just materials coming out of the big projects in Auckland, and of course movements back and forth through Auckland over that border. And it's likely there's going to be differences in levels between Auckland and the rest of the country for weeks and weeks. And of course, limits on MIQ. There are no new places for MIQ. There hasn't been any issued since the beginning of the lockdown. And from my reading of what Chris Hipkins and others are saying, it's going to be quite a lot longer. Just looking for more of those questions here. Anything else that anyone would love to see from the panelists about the area of sustainability and technology? Adrienne, I'm wondering if I can bring you back into the conversation and ask you what it is you're seeing from the procurement side in terms of what specific sustainability issues are cropping up in the way the projects are designed and in procurement decisions.
I think there's an increasing understanding around the breadth of issues that can together deliver really good outcomes. So I think it's the point Carla made that it's a much broader net of sort of impacts that are being sought. There's an incredible focus on decarbonisation, which is understandable in light of the Climate Change Commission's advice to the government. So I think that is dominating. So I think you've got to increasingly be aware of the materials that are going into whatever you're producing, and you know, what those are not only your own materials, but you know, right up your supply chain, where what impact your materials are going to have on that bigger picture climate position for the country.
And are you seeing much in terms of workforce diversity and local spending cropping up?
Yes, I think that's a really hot issue. I think you've touched already on the issue that we're going to have issues with bringing in immigrant workforces. I think we've got some captive workforces here in New Zealand that we aren't yet fully realising. So an obvious one is women, and there's increasing diversity and inclusion initiatives across the sector. So I think that's an untapped resource. I think a greater desire to ensure that we're actually extracting the full kind of value proposition that people can contribute in terms of design thinking and other processes. So where you've got diverse workforces involved in your design processes, you're going to yield a product that's more suited to the community that utilises it. So I think there's all sorts of efficiencies and innovations possible through that workforce utilisation piece.
I'd like to bring in Carla now. If you're there, Carla, if you could pop on your yes, there we go. If you could talk about, from a procurer point of view, you know, how important worker diversity, but also local procurement is for KiwiRail.
Yeah, I think that it's still quite an early space for us with the growth of all of our capital projects team. I think from an environmental perspective, we've sort of started to focus predominantly on resource efficiency and waste. So that's something that you've kind of touched on quite a bit already. And then from the transportation and the Land Transport Fund kind of route, we're starting to see some expectations around reporting in terms of you know, air and air quality and noise, in terms of those social impacts, reporting on those, and also biodiversity, biosecurity as well, from those kind of land-based outcomes perspectives. I think the big focus for us has really been around upskilling of workforces, you know, taking new staff, bringing new staff into KiwiRail, making sure that they are set up on a path where they can take their learning and go and work in other industries across the construction sector. And so something that's been a real passion of mine is making sure that they have got an environmental kind of sustainability componentry to that, so that when they go out into the wider construction industry, they can help to you know, actually execute these broader sustainability outcomes as well. So in terms of taking on new workforce, that's a big focus, I guess, for us socially.
Now, we've got one question in the chat there from Paul asking about the borders, obviously a hot topic at the moment, and why they might be closed for years rather than months. That is a view I'm hearing from within government and particularly aviation and shipping circles. In reality, because of New Zealand's elimination stance and the very strong political popularity of that with the public, more than 7 in 10 New Zealanders want to stick with elimination and very hard borders. And the development of Delta and its ability to sneak in between the bars and get out into the community very fast, and the need to clamp down on it even faster and harder, it means that New Zealand's going to have to stay closed at least into next year before we're properly vaccinated, and that includes kids under the age of 12, and there is no one in the world that has actually approved to do that yet. The Prime Minister has been very clear in the last couple of weeks in particular that Delta is a game changer, and that the potential to reconnect with the world, which was talked about as recently as a month ago, is fading away. The other area is that inside Cabinet, you know, there is a realization that our health system cannot cope with a bigger outbreak than what we've just seen, and the vulnerability of our communities, particularly in South Auckland with the Pacifica and the Māori community, which are still have relatively low vaccination rates, particularly amongst the young. There is a lot of nervousness in government about opening up those borders. And so I'm saying, because obviously this is not a headline the government's keen to put out there, I'm saying if you're thinking that you're going to get access to migrant workers in the next 2 to 3 months, think again, because there is unlikely to be MIQ places for them. And you can see that with the announcement a couple of days ago that the RSC bubble, the one-way bubble for the viticulture and horticulture industries, has been closed. And certainly there is a lot of concern about what's happening overseas, not just with the Delta variant, but the Mu variant, which is yet to come, and the fact that we're seeing breakthrough infections and issues where vaccinated people are passing on Delta. So just a heads up, think not in terms of months, but in terms of years, in terms of a proper opening up. Got to remember too that the Philippines and India and China, which has generated quite a few of the workers coming in for the construction sector, are really completely closed for years because they're not properly vaccinated and won't be for a long, long time. And the same with Europe, where there may be high vaccination rates, but because it can be passed on and we're not vaccinated here yet, that is going to be a problem. So that's one of the answers there.
Yeah, just on that note, CCNZ has been advocating for some changes to the settings. We ran a survey along with ACE NZ and a couple of other associations around the settings, because there are some specific ways that we can bring in specialist workers that are needed at the moment. But that was largely when it was set up for projects over $100 million. And so if you're needing someone to go and fix the local water systems, most of those projects will not be more than $100 million. So, you know, I think there's some detail in there that I've dropped into the chat function. Now, I appreciate we are over time, but with the level of expertise and knowledge we've got on this panel, look, I think it's fine just to continue. If any of the panelists need to leave, please do feel free to say farewell. But otherwise, I'm perfectly happy to continue with the Q&A if everyone else is happy to continue with that.
Yeah, no, it would be good to get your questions there. You mentioned, Fraser, that there's an attempt to see if we can get some of the workers through the border for those big projects. And I understand for some of the big boring projects going on in Auckland around the CRL, that it's not a matter of turning these things off and going away for a few months. You have to keep them going. And there's a lot of specialist skills that need to come in from overseas. The basic problem, though, is at the moment, there just is not the space in MIQ, and the government is not in a position to increase it anytime soon. And we've heard from this week from Chris Hipkins saying that there is not the capacity to add on hotel rooms that are appropriate for the ventilation that's needed. The discovery with Delta is that it's incredibly infectious in a aerosol scents, and there was a case a few months ago where literally one room's door opened for 3 seconds and someone else's room across the hallway opened for 2 seconds. They happened to be at the same time, and a waft of air came through, and a bunch of people were infected. So there aren't the hotels or the facilities to do it, neither are there the staff. So those people who are expecting an increase in MIQ space or slots for workers will really struggle in the next, I think, 6 months to a year at least, if not until 2024, if only because we've built this amazing cage for ourselves where we are COVID free pretty much, and people are fighting for it very hard, whereas in other countries they haven't had that choice through their own fault or simply through circumstance. And you'd be shocked at the level of political support for a very hard elimination, a very tight border settings by the broad public, as opposed to those people running business or just trying to, get family home for funerals and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, so just a question that came through back on the sustainability front, because I think, everyone, we've been talking about COVID-19 for quite a while. In terms of contractors impacting environmental sustainability and quality up the supply chain, someone said that they often win work and don't have the luxury of picking the top dollar, and therefore high effort sustainability clients. So, picking and choosing based on your sustainability practices is not always a choice for people. Might be a good one for Stacy to cover on, contractors impacting, up the food chain, basically.
Yeah, thanks, Fraser. Yeah, now this is, I suppose, the $1 million question. It's, we want sustainability, and there'll probably be legislation that will start to drive those outcomes. But at the moment, during the tender process, it's something that's probably a nice to have rather than something that's financed. So until we move some of those settings, and you've got to look at the Dutch, they and their tender processes look at sustainability and initiatives, and then have some financial weighting to them, so that they are achieving good environmental sustainable outcomes. So we've got a little bit of work to do in that space, and yeah, it's probably the $1 million question going forward, how we finance that.
Yeah, Stacy, are you seeing real change in culture from the top down on this issue? Because I sense the ministers and the CEOs might be talking the good game, but it may not necessarily go down to the managers with their spreadsheets and their decisions.
Yeah, I suppose it does come in from that policy level, whether it be government policy or for company policy. We are starting to see in some of the tenders that companies actually have that basic policy in place, whether it's around sustainability, diversity, pay rates, initiatives that they are driving. So it'll come more and more as government starts to put in policy and legislation. But at this stage, we're sort of at the outset.
One of the other areas that this drive for sustainability is coming from is from investors, but also from staff. There will be in many businesses, particularly younger people who've come from higher skilled backgrounds, who are the most in demand, who are asking questions about what their company or their employer does on the sustainability front. And the other one is from an investor's point of view. I know a lot of companies in the sector are family owned, but there are also those that are internationally corporate owned. And it's interesting that just in the last couple of months, it's become clear that more than a third of the funds to invest in companies, and also in bonds, which are increasingly used to finance large infrastructure projects, the sustainability aspects are increasingly important for investors, not just in the equity or the ownership of companies, but also in the bonds, which are used to finance projects. So you can definitely see in the future there is going to be a lot of investors who ask the question, what is the net carbon impact of this project? What are the levels of staff diversity and local spending going on in these particular projects? As investors increasingly ask the question, is this a short-term pump dump operation, or is this actually going to add to the long-term benefit of the society and the planet as well? Because that issue of what's happening internationally is really important. Any other questions that I can see there, or questions that need answering? How are we going there, Fraser?
Yeah, well, I think we're pretty close to time. I'd actually be quite interested in some perspective from Carla and Jim on how like those new technologies kind of might hit the ground from a client perspective, or also from a practical perspective, and maybe we could wrap on that. So I mean, yeah, for instance, if we're driving change and sustainability in procurement, from a contractor perspective, how does that look from the client perspective and from the technology provider?
Jim.
From a technology provider, actually, there's a comment in there from Peter regarding the fact that technology comes from overseas. Actually, getting components is really difficult at the moment. The global supply chain is rather distressed, and trying to supply technology has become an issue. In terms of technology and the environment, I think there's a lot of different technologies that are used as part of sustainability. From fleet management, which gives us a good oversight as to where everything is going, where waste is going, where recycle is going, and in terms of managing, the job site around the local community. That's one of the areas. Fuel emissions, because we can catch that information too. So the technology is available. I think the key to it is using the different facets of the technology rather than looking at a digital copy of a sheet as being, we've gone digital. That's a digital copy of a paper sheet is one thing, but how does that impact on the rest of the job? How are we using this information to improve the overall project? And at the end of the day, I think when you see increases in requests around sustainability from the contract owners, whether it be government or private entities, I think it's important that, we look at the whole picture in terms of the amount of data that's available to judge the impact that the technology is having on a project. I think we don't manage that maybe as good as we could. So looking at that, I think there's room for improvement there, but I think the technology will drive a lot of sustainability and vice versa.
Just one final question for you, Carla. Are you seeing signs from managers and the stakeholders up the chain, if you like, that people's KPIs are actually now including sorts of measures on sustainability in terms of workforce diversity, carbon emissions reduction, and also the saving of resources and use of technology?
I think that's coming, but I don't think it's quite there yet. I think just to mirror what Adrienne was saying in her presentation, we're not quite at that position where sustainability is fully embedded within everyone's kind of remit as part of their job. I think that is where we need to get to if we want to see real traction. And I think we're at that position, certainly in KiwiRail, where within, particularly in our project space, we're looking at making sure that throughout the stages of a project, right at that initial stage, we are looking at what are our opportunities in this space so that it's very clear the whole way through. This is what we're aiming for, and this is each person's responsibility in that process. But I think we're not quite there to the level that I would like to see. And I think that is probably the same across all industries and things. We just need to get to that point where, exactly like you say, it's embedded. It's a responsibility and accountability with everyone across the whole spectrum of industries.
Can I just add, though, there too, that I think a lot of the reticence that we've got around this is if everybody turns their mind back to when we were implementing health and safety and even the well-being side of things, occupational health, everybody treated these issues differently, and they're now BAU. So I think it's just a case of that maturity curve, people moving up the maturity curve and starting to see that this is actually the way we're going to have to operate into the future. We're there on safety to a large extent now, and that's been a journey. And I think we've just got to travel the same journey with sustainability.
And the pressure is coming from the top and the bottom, from workers and directors. From my point of view, one of the most interesting developments I've seen in the last 6 months around not just climate change, but also workforce diversity has been the growth of legal action aimed at governments and large companies by activists arguing that human rights are being breached, and that the directors and the managers and the councillors and the CEOs are being negligent in their roles as directors and CEOs by not taking more action on these issues. And so the pressure is growing from all sorts of corners for this sort of approach to not just filter down from the top, but filter up from the bottom. And I think it's going to happen. As Adrienne made a great point there about health and safety. It took a while to get that through, but now it's there, it's embedded, and the same thing's going to be happening on sustainability. And you can see that with the COVID period that the use of technology has just had a huge leap forward. And the other thing to know is that the technology, although as Jim says, it might be hard to get at the moment because there's a few chips missing, it will come hard and heavy, and getting ahead of the curve is the way to go.
Nice. Okay, we're just about, thanks everyone for all your time today. We're at the wrap-up stage of the event now, so congratulations, we made it. Thanks everyone for all your time. There's one thing I'd just really like to wrap up on, and that's a question for each of you. We could do a one-sentencer on it. What is the one thing that you think businesses should focus on in terms of sustainability and technology in the next 3 to 5 years? I think that'd be really good if we could start with you, Stacy, maybe, and then we'll filter through Carla, Jim, Adrienne, and Bernard. I'll finish. Let you wrap us up after that with your take. Okay, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Fraser. Yeah, I think the key thing for our members at the moment, if you haven't started doing it already, is to actually monitor or to understand where you stand as a company. I mean, look at carbon, what initiatives you have in place at the moment. If you don't have that baseline data, then it's very difficult to report that in tenders or to report that to staff. And we talked about sort of younger staff wanting to see that. As Bernard alluded to, there are investors and outside organisations that will look to see that information. And if you have that, you can sort of understand where you are. And then if you need to move the goalpost, then look at ways and means that you can make that happen.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's really, similar to what Stacey's saying. Just if you don't, you need to get that baseline. So you need to understand and where you can start to gather data and information about how you're performing and how you're doing in certain areas, because that's what your clients are going to want to see throughout your work processes as well. So just looking at trying to gather data in sort of every facet of sustainability, all those areas basically.
Mine would simply be get going. So I think the time for this is now, really. We've got to get going. There's imperatives, particularly in the climate change space, where we need to get on board with this, because it's an existential issue, really. So get going.
Go for it, Jim.
Yeah, sorry, my comment would only be that, as we can see from the survey, many people have technology, leverage the technology to get the data that you need to demonstrate that the sustainability is being managed and that the projects are being managed well, similar to what Carla does. Get the data, demonstrate that, the job is being done well and sustainably.
All I would say is be aware of the coming liabilities for not reducing carbon emissions, and start to get regularly into your routines for grabbing information. Things like the petrol price. We all know what the petrol price is every day. Well, you should all know that the carbon price for New Zealand is now up to a record high of $65 a tonne, and the futures for carbon prices are now up over $75 a tonne. So if you don't understand what your future liabilities are for carbon emissions and the value of reducing it, then it might be a good idea to get on top of that, not just in terms of understanding what your own carbon usage is and what your plans are to reduce it, but the future liability of not reducing it and how that is rising rapidly. To give you an idea, the price of carbon has risen since July from $40 to $65 a tonne. And there are forecasts from the Climate Commission that we could go over $200 a tonne within the next 10 years. So start to work in the carbon price into your thinking about the future and future liabilities and costs. Thank you.
Thank you to all our presenters. CCNZ's here to help as well. So if you've got any feedback, do send it to us. We are potentially looking to start a sustainability committee as well. All the FAQs we might try and circulate an FAQ document after this. And thank you very much to all our presenters and attendees today. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did too. And until next time.
Ka kite anō.